Okay, so I think this is lecture number 84 in our series as we approach the conclusion of book 2, but we still have probably maybe 5 or 6 weeks left, but we're getting real close. We are about to start chapter 40 of book 2 of the Guide to Perplexed, and in the Pines edition, that's page 381. So we're about to start chapter 40. Give me 1 second here. All right. So if you remember the last chapter 39, Rambam explained to us that because Moshe Rabbeinu was the only one who gave us a Torah. No one else gave us a Torah, right? So he was the only prophet through whom a mode of how to live our lives, the rules by which we live our lives. And the Rambam explained that the Torah was designed that if we were to keep it, that our personal lives and our societal lives would be perfect, would be one that had perfect balance, not too much of this or too much of that, not too little of this, too little of that, but perfectly balanced. That Moshe was the only one who gave that to us, and that the only people who have a problem with it are people who want tyranny, who want greed, who want corruption, etc. So but because so that was really the essence of the last chapter. And because Moshe was on a completely different level of prophecy that no one else in history ever was or ever will be. So that was in the last chapter 39. In chapter 40, he's going to continue a little on the subject of the prophecy of the law, but he's going to tell us how you can tell who a false prophet is. And there's a lot of really interesting ideas that he's going to tell us. So let's get to it. Chapter 40. It is explained with utmost clarity. In other words, people know, right? Everyone knows that human beings, man is political by nature, and that it is his nature to live in society. Now, political meaning we're involved in groups of people that live together and have to figure out ways to live together with others and have a society that works. He is not like the other animals for which society is not a necessity. And many animals, they live on their own, right? Although I mean there are maybe some very, very primitive societal structures with certain types of animals, but the Rambam is drawing this as a comparison, as a contrast, right? Human beings are by nature societal. We're social beings. So because of the manifold composition of the species, and because we are composed of such complex psychological and physical characteristics, for as you know, it is the last one to have been composed, because we are the end of the evolutionary chain, at least in Aristotelian philosophy. The human beings, we're the last one, and in the Torah, the humans are the last ones to be created, so we're the most complex of them all. And so because of that, there are many differences between the individuals belonging to it. Human beings vary one from the other in many different ways. Like you may find differences in traits between one animal and another, but nowhere to the extreme that you'll find it within people. This is what the Rambam is saying. So that you can hardly find two individuals who are in any accord with respect to one of the species of moral habits, right? Well, it's very hard to find two people that are the same if you can compare their personalities, right? Except in a way similar to that in which their visible forms may be in accord with the other. You might find, this person looks a little, this one's about the same height, this one the same skin tone, this one's the same, similar this, similar that. But ultimately, people are very, very different. And it'd be very hard pressed to find two people that aren't obviously different from each other in some ways. So, owing to, and why is this? The cause of this difference the cause of this is the difference of the mixtures. The mixtures is in the Hebrew kapach is translated as the mezeg, which is the different, how much of this and how much of that makes up this person, how he's mixed together, his recipe that forms him. So, and also the accidents consequent to the form in question. Accidents, remember, I keep translating accidents as qualities, because it's just a much better word. So therefore, every person has different qualities. Everyone is different. For every natural form has certain accidents proper and consequent to it. right? Those actions being other than those that are consequent to matter. The form that this person takes has certain qualities that the other forms don't have. Nothing like this great difference between the various individuals is found among other species of animals, right? Among animals, you might find a little bit, but you'll never find such dramatic differences between one and the other. There's a certain quality that most cheetahs have or most lions have. You might find some differences, but not to the extreme that you'll find it among people, in which the difference between individuals belonging to the same species is small. Among animals, the difference between one and the other is small, but man being in this respect an exception. Man is different from the other animals in the fact that our differences are much more extreme. For you may find two individuals who seem, with regard to every moral habit, to belong to two different species. It's so much so that you can find two people that you think these can't possibly both be human beings. They're so different from each other. So, for example, you may find in an individual cruelty that reaches a point at which he kills the youngest of his sons in his great anger. You might find somebody who's just so cruel that he or she will literally, and it's hard to even say these words, kill their own child, right? You find such cruelty among humans if you look to the extreme. We don't have to go that far to imagine contemporary people who exhibit such horrific cruelty that they can do things that are just horrible beyond imagination. Whereas at the same time, another individual is full of pity at the killing of a bug. Another person would refuse to kill even an insect because they're so kind and caring towards anything, and wouldn't even hurt a fly. His soul being too tender for this. The same holds good for most accidents. The same thing for most qualities that human beings have. We can find within the realm of humanity people that are dramatically different one from the other. So what the Rambam is really setting up here is something that's really important, and we've seen it before, and we're going to see it again. Is that the idea of the Torah, right? Is there's a personal perfection idea, right? That by keeping the Torah, we make ourselves, like Rambam explained at the end of the previous chapter 39. Very not too extreme, right? The Rambam, perfection is the middle balance, is the balance. We have enough love, but not so much, that we commit acts that we're not supposed to. Enough of this, but not too much of this, and so on. That's the perfect balance. But also, the Torah is here to help us build a good society. This is really important because a lot of things we find in the Torah, we can only understand them when we say, well, let's look at this idea. If this idea was actualized the way the Torah wants us to do, right, the society that will be built, should it keep those laws, would be a society that brings about perfection, which brings about a good and appropriate society. So because each human being is so different, so the Rambam is going to go to the next step. Now, as the nature of human beings, of the human species, requires that there be those differences among the individuals belonging to it, and as in addition, society is a necessity for this nature, now that I just laid out that humans are, I'm saying, number one, I laid out that humans are very different one from the other. But number two, we also have to live together. We also are social animals. Remember, that's how we started this chapter, by saying that human beings by nature live in societies. So you have these two things seem to conflict, right? You have people who we need to live together, but we're very different from each other. So how do you add those two things? You can see right away this can lead to some serious problems, right? So it is by no means possible that this society should be perfected, and it's necessarily so, right, except through a ruler who gauges the actions of individuals. We need to have someone in charge, right? There has to be some sort of a governmental structure, right? Remember, the only governmental structure that in the Rambam's day could have been imagined is a ruler, right? There was no such thing as rule by a Republican or Democratic institution, really. It's a ruler who is going to gauge the action of individuals, perfecting that which is deficient and reducing that which is excessive, and who prescribes actions and moral habits that all of them must always practice in the same way. And that ruler will say, these are the rules that you have to follow. You're not allowed to this, you have to this. You're not allowed to this, you have to that, so on and so forth. So that the natural diversity that is among people becomes hidden through the multiple points of conventional accord, so the community becomes well ordered. So so he just said two things, right? Number one, there has to be a ruler, and that ruler has to give us laws. Now, on the larger level, right, that could mean, right, the God, right, and the Torah. Okay, so the ruler being God, who gives us laws, and the Torah is the body of laws that God gave us. So just like in a society, there has to be a government that makes rules so that people function. It has to be the same way. God has a Torah through which he gives rules to us. Therefore, I say that the Torah, and I'm going to translate, but because in the Hebrew, the Pine says here the law, but in the Hebrew, it's the Torah, right? Although it is not natural, the Torah is something which is God written, God given. It's not a natural thing, right? However, it enters into what is natural. God, who is that ruler, puts the Torah into this world, and it becomes part of the natural world. So the Torah becomes, even though it is the word of God, but it becomes part of the world within which we function, within which we live. There, it is a part of the wisdom of the deity. It's part of God's wisdom with regard to the permanence of the species of which he has willed the existence, right? It's God's wisdom. He put the Torah in this world because in that way, right, the humanity can last, right? Humanity will not last if it doesn't have the guidance of the Torah, okay? Remember how Rambam drops things and then he goes on another subject, and then in chapters later he'll drop another idea. He's dropping this foundation really for the third book, right, which we're going to get to together, about how the Torah fits into his rationalist scheme, right? And you can get a sense of what it's going to be. It's going to be that the Torah is designed by God in such a way to make the world a perfect place, right? And if we only keep the Torah the way it was meant to, the world would be good, okay? This is the fundamental idea that Rambam is going with, that the Torah is a very rational thing, that entity or body of laws that God put into this world and gave it to us through his prophet Moshe, right? In order that the individuals, in Rambam's word, should, with regard to the permanence of this species, okay? That he put it into into its nature, that individuals belonging to it should have the faculty of ruling, right? And that God put this Torah into the world also in such a way that we can, that some people will now have the faculty of being in charge, of making sure that we keep the rules. So among them, there is the one to whom the regimen mentioned has been revealed by prophecy directly, right? So, and who was the one who brought this Torah into the world? That was, of course, the one who took it by prophecy, who Rambam told us in the last chapter was only one, and that was Moshe. He is the prophet, or the bringer of the nomos. He is the one that brings the rules down into this world. So among them, there are also those to have the faculty to compel people to accomplish, observe, and actualize that which is established by those two. So you have the ruler God, you have the prophet Moshe, and then you have others who can help make sure that people keep those laws, other leaders of various sorts. And what are they? They are a sovereign who adopts the nomos in question, the king, right, who takes the rules and enforces them. And someone claiming to be a prophet who adopts the law of the prophet, either the whole of it or a portion. And now the Rambam is going to go off to what would be if somebody uses the same model, but for ulterior motives, right? Someone who uses the same model, but he's not actually the one to whom God gave the Torah to. So it could be a person who adopts part of the Torah, right? Or either the whole part or part of it. He's adopting a portion, but as soon as he goes ahead and adopts only part of the Torah, but not all of the Torah, and abandoning another portion. So here the Rambam is explaining to us, right? The famous idea in the Torah of lo tigra, right? We can't take away from it, we can't add to it, right? Because the Torah is given as a whole body of law, perfect from God through Moshe. If a person were to take the same model but change it a little bit, take away a little bit, or add a little bit, right? Then there's a reason why he's doing that. And why is he doing that? His adopting it may be due either to this being easier for him, right? He can't enforce the whole thing. He doesn't understand the whole thing. He doesn't like the whole thing. So it's easier just to take part of it, right? Or to his wishing out of jealousy, or because he has in his heart, he wants, jealousy here is more like of arrogance. He wants to make people fancy that those matters came to him through a prophetic revelation. He wants to pick and choose things from the Torah because he wants people to think that he's a prophet. It doesn't take much imagination to know who the Rambam is talking about here without naming him, right? Someone who acted as if he's a prophet, as if he's takes parts of the Torah, but only parts of the Torah, but not all of it, because he wants everyone to think he's a prophet. And that with regard to them, he does not follow somebody else. For among the people there are men who admire a certain perfection, take pleasure in it, have a passion for it, and wish that people should imagine that this perfection belongs to them, right? So they may start with a good idea of wanting perfection, but they have this selfish attitude where they want everyone to think that it's they who is the prophet, which is why it's so important. And Rambam says this in other places, that Moshe Rabbeinu, we're told, is right, Mikol Adam, he was the most humble person. He had no self-interest, which is the main reason how we know that Moshe's Torah is the real one, is because of his humility. The other prophets come and don't have that humility. Though they know they possess no perfection, even though those people themselves know that they don't have any perfection. Thus, you see that there are many who lay a claim to and give out as their own the poetry of someone else. We see this on much more mundane matters. People plagiarize all the time. You have a guy who writes a book and he copies half of it from somebody else. This also has been done with regard to certain works of men of science and to particular points of many sciences. You might read somebody who writes a treatise on whatever scientific subject, and half of it he copied from some other guy. For an envious and lazy individual, a person who's envious, meaning all they want is their own honor and their own aggrandizement, and they're lazy, they're too lazy to do the intellectual work on their own, sometimes comes upon a thing invented by someone else and claims that it was he who invented it. This has also happened with, just like there are false scientists and false poets, people of the arts that steal art, and people of the sciences that steal science, it's also happened with prophecies. There are false prophets that steal prophecies. For we find people who laid a claim to prophecy and said things with regard to which there had never been at any time a prophetic revelation from God. For instance, Tzidkiah, the son of Hananiah, right? So that story, it's in Melachim, where it's an interesting story. It's in Melachim Aleph, chapter 22, Chav Beis, where Yehoshaphat was the king of Yehuda at the time, and he had a military alliance with Achav, who was the king of Israel, of the northern kingdom at the time. Yehoshaphat being a righteous king, and Achav being a not so righteous king. And Yehoshaphat meets up with Achav, and they want to know whether, and Yehoshaphat says, maybe there's a Navi here to tell us whether we should go on the attack tomorrow to, I think it was Aram was the enemy of the time. And so Yehoshaphat was hesitant to go to battle because he wanted to make sure God wanted it to happen. So Achav goes and he calls to his, he finds himself a prophet who always tells him what he wants to hear. And that's this guy, Tzidkiah, the son of Hananiah. So he talks in prophetic, language and everything, but meanwhile, he's full of baloney, right? So, and it immediately became clear that he was full of baloney, and Yehoshaphat called another prophet who Achav didn't want. What was his name? I'm sorry, let me look it up again. Michayahu, who was a real prophet, right? And he tells Achav, this ain't gonna go well, right? And so Achav complains. See, he always tells me bad stuff, but he was anyway. That was that story. But so Rambam is using him as an example of someone who acts like a prophet, talks like a prophet, but what he says has nothing to do with prophecy. And we find other people who laid a claim to prophecy and said things that God hasn't deliberately said. Sometimes you find someone, right, who steals a prophecy, right? But a prophetic, so he'll say something with a little bit of truth in it. It's something that actually is the word of God, like you find with Hananiah ben Azor, who was he was one of the prophets who argued with Yirmiyahu, who kept on telling everybody, Yirmiyahu he's a pessimist. Everything's gonna be fine. It's all good. But he was famous for, in his prophecies, there was always something in it that seemed okay, but then he would take it off in a bad direction, right? So accordingly, these men give out as their own the prophetic revelation in question and adorn themselves with it. The knowledge and discernment of all this are very clear. So let's just review really fast. So number one, we understand that the prophecy, there's a ruler who gives rules, who makes our society work well. And if the prophet is a true prophet, a humble prophet, whose interest is not self-interest, and that prophet is truly conveying the word of God, then if we follow those rules, society will be good. That's the Torah. Then there are lots and lots of people who come around who are selfish, who have their own self-interest, and all they want is self-promotion. And they can either say false prophecies and claim to be, or they can steal a little bit of truth, but really the whole thing is, but their whole aim is just to lead us in the wrong way and to get credit for themselves. The knowledge and discernment is very clear. I shall explain this to you in order that the matter should not be obscure to you, and so that you should have a criterion by means of which you will be able to distinguish. Rambam is saying, I'm going to give you, and he so far has started to do it. He's laying the foundation, but as we finish this chapter, we will have the criteria to know if somebody stands up on a street corner with a long beard and starts proclaiming prophecies in Times Square, right? Is the guy full of baloney, or is the guy really a prophet? And you better listen to what he tells you. And Rambam is going to tell us the criteria. And my hint is, remember humility as the key factor here, but let's go as we go through this, right? So so I'm going to give you the criterion by means of which you will be able to distinguish between the regimens of nomoi, laws that have been laid down, the regimens of the divine law, and the regimens of those who took over something from the dicta of the prophets, raise a claim to it, and give it out as their own. Concerning the nomoi, with respect to which those who have laid them down have stated clearly that these are nomoi, and that they have laid down by following their own thoughts. In other words, if somebody comes to you and says, I sat down and I thought for 10 years and I worked out all the things, and this is the perfect laws for everyone to follow. I don't know, Karl Marx, he comes to you and he tells you, I thought this through, and this system is the system, and this will solve the world's problems. Well, if they do that, right, there's no need to adduce proofs for this. For with its being recognized by the adversary, no further evidence needed. In other words, he told you he's the guy that thought about it, so you don't have to wonder if it's prophecy or not, because he told you it's not prophecy. He told you that he himself thought of it. So whatever, you can look at it, you can read it, you can argue, you can disagree, but he's not making any false claims for the sources of his material, right? You understand how it takes it up a huge notch when somebody comes and claims that he's speaking in the name of God, right? The Rambam is trying to tell us now, when someone comes and speaks in the name of God, do you believe him or not, right? So accordingly, I only want to give you knowledge concerning the regimens with regard to the claim is made that they are prophetic. Some of them are truly prophetic. I mean, divine. There might be some that are truly prophets, while others are nomoi. Others are just giving you rules, and they're not prophetic at all. And others are plagiarisms. They're just copies, okay? Accordingly, if you find a Torah, right, the whole end of which and the whole purpose and of the chief thereof, who determined the actions required by it, are directed exclusively towards the ordering of the city and its circumstances and the abolition in it of injustice and oppression. So you find a system which is only this worldly, right? It's very, very practical. It's a system of law, period. It's not a system based on. Now, let me back up a little. So when we think about establishing a system of government, a system of law, the first thing that comes to mind as Americans is the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution, right? So it starts off, by saying certain principles that all men are created equal, right? Everyone has life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? These are things. So it starts off with an idea, and then on that idea, it bases laws, right? So that's more than what Rambam is explaining here, right? Rambam is explaining here someone who just says, just laws, no ideas, no vision, right? Just laws, right? Saying you can't steal, you can't beat up your friend, you can't kill, just laws, right? So no heed is given to the perfecting the rational faculty. There's nothing in this society that helps people become better. And according in the Rambam's worldview, making the people in society develop their rational faculty means like literally setting up universities, setting up a way for people to study, a way for people to learn, a way for people to better their knowledge, to become better, right? So the whole purpose of that law being, on the contrary, the arrangement in whatever way this may be brought about of the circumstances of people in their relations with one another, and provision for their obtaining, in accordance with the opinion of the chief, a certain something deemed to be happiness, right? He's saying that the purpose of all this is that everybody should be happy. Nobody should be punching each other in the street. Nobody should be stealing from each other. Nobody should be killing each other. Everything should be ordered, right? You must know that law is a nomos. That's just laws, right? And the man who laid it down belongs, as we have mentioned, to the third class of people who are perfect in their imaginative faculty. The guy, he might have a good vision. He has a vision of a kind of society that he wants, and he sets it up. But there's nothing in that society which helps the people grow in their, sometimes people would call it in their spirituality. The Rambam calls it in the rational faculty, which is the mind with which we think, which we study, with which we learn, which we deduce A from B and B from C, etc. If, on the other hand, you find a law, remember, Rambam is driving towards the perfection of the Torah, right? Remember that. So he's giving us these examples of human law because he's driving towards showing us why the Torah is perfect, right? So if, on the other hand, you find a Torah, all of whose ordinances are due to attention being paid, as was stated before, to the soundness of the circumstances pertaining to the body, and also to the soundness of belief, right? In other words, that system of law doesn't only tell us how to live and how to live with each other so we don't beat each other up, but it also tells us how to learn proper beliefs in our mind, how to train our minds to find the truth, right? A Torah that takes pains to inculcate correct opinions with regard to God may be exalted in the first place with regard to angels, and that desires to make man wise, to give him understanding, to awaken his attention, so that he should know the whole of that which exists in its true form, so that he should understand all of that which exists. Remember, this is almost the exact same words Rambam used when he described Moshe Rabbeinu way back in book 1, right? Who knew everything, all of existence. Moshe saw, he knew all of science, everything, right? You must know, right? This guidance comes from him with a capital H. That comes from God, right? If you see a perfect system of laws that actually not only makes it's important to make sure that it says in the Torah, you can't steal, and you can't punch your friend, and you can't kill, and you can't take your fellow's wife, and you can't, so on and so forth. Those are all very important, right? To have an ordered society. But the Torah does so much more than that. If you follow the Torah, it perfects your mind. It perfects your heart. It perfects your soul. It makes the entire people aspire to something greater. Then you know that this law, that Rambam says, this Torah is divine. This is not something that a human being made up. This is divine. Remember, what does divine mean? It means the perfect act, the active intellect, which comes straight from God. Rambam described it clearly, straight into our active intellects, into our own minds, our own rational faculties, the part of our brain which thinks, which, and so on. That is perfection. That is divine. That is the Torah. It remains for you to know whether he who lays claim to such a guidance is a perfect man, to whom a prophetic revelation of that guidance has been vouchsafed, or whether he is an individual who lays claim to these dicta, having plagiarized them. So now that I told you, okay, so let's get back to it. I told you I was going to tell you the trick to know who's the fraud and who's the real deal. So here it is. The way of putting this to a test. Okay, so you all can think of corrupt cult leader of choice, whichever one you want to imagine in your mind, right? He or she, usually he, but sometimes she, that presents themselves as the spiritual leader of whatever, and they are always prophets, and they have lead movements. Are they full of baloney, or are they the real thing? So this is what you do. The way to put it to a test is to consider the perfection of that individual. Remember, Rambam spent so much time explaining to us what it takes to be a real prophet, right? So now he's going to tell us, so let's look, right? Carefully to examine his actions and study his way of life. How does that person live? What kind of a person is he, right? The strongest of the indications you should pay attention to is constituted by his renunciation of and contempt for the bodily pleasures. Now, you'll see in a minute, Rambam doesn't mean here that he doesn't eat or he doesn't sleep with his wife, right? What the Rambam means is that he's not pursuing his agenda in order to fulfill his bodily pleasures, right? For this is the first of the degrees of the people of science and all the more of the prophets. The first thing you need to do is be, and here Rambam is explicitly, and he's going to say this even more, it has to be sexually, right, in order, right? Because as there are so many examples you could think of in unfortunately in the Jewish world and in the world all around us of religious leaders who are not appropriate in that arena of life. So they use their position in order to satisfy their bodily pleasures. Usually it's bodily sexual pleasures. That person is a fraud, period. And Rambam is going to go into it a little bit different, a little bit deeper. In particular, this holds good with regard to the sense that is a disgrace to us as Aristotle, and especially in what belongs to it with regard to the foulness of copulation. Rambam, and he emphasized this many times, right? For this reason, God has stigmatized through it everyone who lays claim to prophecy, so that the truth should be made clear to those who seek it, and who should not go astray and fall into error. It sounds so obvious and something that doesn't need to be said, but it does need to be said because we see it so many times. It's hard to open a newspaper today and on any day, or not a newspaper, whatever app you use to read on your phone, the news, right? That you don't have another religious figure involved in these kinds of activities. It's so incredibly contemporary that it's unbelievable that Rambam was saying this 1,000 years ago, and it's the same thing. It hasn't changed an iota, right? Do you not see how Tzidkiyahu, the son of Maaseiah, and Achav, the son of Kulaya, who these are false prophets of the end of the first temple period in the time of King Tzidkiyahu, in the waning years of the Beis Hamikdash. These were also enemies of Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu had a whole collection of prophets who didn't like him, right? They claimed to be prophets. They were followed by the people and gave forth dicta deriving from a revelation that had come to others. They mixed their own prophecies together with prophecies that God had said, and how they were plunged into the vileness of the pleasure of sexual intercourse, so that they fornicated with the wives of their companions and followers, so that God made them notorious, just as he disgraced others. And in the end, their punishment was to be burned by the king of Babel when he came to conquer Jerusalem. As Yirmiyahu said forth, saying, and you could read the verse Yirmiyahu said at the end, as everything came to an end, the first Beis Hamikdash at least, all of them shall be taken by a curse by the exiles of Yehuda and so on. The Lord shall make you like Tzidkiah and Achav, the king of Babel roasted, because they have wrought vile deeds in Israel and committed adultery with their neighbors' wives and have spoken words in my name falsely, etc., etc. Understand this intention. So the Rambam says, when you see a person using his leadership in order to exploit others, most importantly in the area of inappropriate sexuality, that is a sign that this person is a fraud. And so someone who does and acts in that way is an absolute fraud. Now, Rambam uses this particular bodily pleasure as the prime example, but it would be any person who uses his, like I said, usually his, but it could be hers too, a position of power in order for their own pleasure, for their own selfish needs and wants, then you know that person is a fraud. And this can be extended to all forms of leadership, and it's a very contemporary idea, and such a prophet shouldn't be listened to. But if the prophet does what he does and says what he says not for his own purposes, and he does it for humble purposes, and he has in mind the betterment of society, then he's the real deal. So that concludes chapter 40. There was a lot packed into this chapter, but I think I'll open the floor for comments or questions or whatever. Go ahead.
I thought there's a paragraph here that suggests that maybe there can be somebody coming along as great as Moses. I thought the guiding principle, one of the fundamentals, is there can never be a prophet like Moses. So why is he suggesting, at least in that paragraph you read earlier, that
there may be someone
somebody has all these qualities?
Well, I think what he really means, I think it remains true that there will be no one like Moshe, but the other prophets, the true prophets, have a little bit of this legitimacy, and those people, what they teach is real. And we're going to see it in the next chapter a little when he comes back down from Moshe to other prophets, that they also have this quality, that they're humble, that they're transmitting God's word, and they're doing it for the good of the people, not for the good of themselves. So they have a little bit of it. They're not giving us a whole Torah, but they are telling us what to do in certain situations. They are trying to guide us. So I think that's all he means. I don't think he's contradicting himself in that he felt that there will never be another Moshe. I'm glad you brought that up. Any other comments, questions, ideas, observations, prophecies? All right. So that concludes chapter 40, and we're about to head into chapter 41. I don't think we'll be able to finish it, but I'll start it. Okay. And also, let me use this opportunity. So next week is Pesach. I know it's called Moed, but we're going to take a break for next week for the holiday. The week after, I don't know yet if I'll be able to or not, but maybe, right? It'll be the day after Pesach, right? At least in Chutz La'aretz it will be. And the week after I'll be able to do it. And then I'll be gone for a couple weeks in May, and I'll tell you as we get closer. I also would like to mention that my son, one of my boys is in the IDF in the reserves, and he's been called up enough times already, but he just finished. So he spent a couple months in Gaza, and now he went home for a month or two, and then they sent his unit back up to the Lebanese border. So, and today he got home to Yerushalayim from the Lebanese border, but the last night his unit was hit by a missile. A couple of his friends were wounded. They're all going to be okay, but they were wounded, and literally the night before they were going to leave, and it was very close to where he was standing. So it was very thank God that he came back okay. But if you read about the recent stuff with Hezbollah, it was his unit that was hit. But he's back home now, and hopefully sleeping a good sleep that he deserves in a real bed. But anyway,
thank you.
Yeah, so let's do chapter 41. Let's start it. So I do not need to explain what a dream is, Rambam says. I don't have to tell you. Everybody knows what a dream is. Go to sleep, close your eyes, you'll dream. All right, good. Next. But a vision, as for a vision, as in I do make myself known. Let me pull out the Hebrew so I could. These psukim sound better in Hebrew. Right? Through I do make myself known to him through a vision. That's how God explains how he speaks to the prophet. And that's what it's called when it says the vision of prophecy. It's also called the hand of the Lord, right? And it's also called a vision, or sight, right? It is a fearful, terrifying state. It makes one tremble, when one receives such a message from the Lord. This happens when a prophet is awake. The vision comes not necessarily when he goes to bed in the middle of the night and he's sleeping, but it comes to him while he's awake. Commotion is bar Daniel, like it says in Daniel, when he says, and I saw this great vision, and I saw this great vision, and it wasn't any more strength in me, right? Right, and my comeliness was turned into corruption. I attained no strength. And I was in a deep sleep on my face towards the ground. So this was the when a person receives a vision from God, he loses, it's fearful, it's awesome, it makes one shake with the dread, right? The speech of the angel to him and is setting him upright. All this happens in a vision of prophecy, right? It says Vani hayisi nerdam al panai upanai arza, right? I fell into a slumber on my face, right, and my face was to the ground. So this is what a vision of prophecy is. In a state such as this, the senses too cease to function, right? So remember, the Rambam in his cognitive model told us about the rational faculty, the imaginative faculty, right? So the active intellect acts upon the rational faculty, which we think with, and then the rational faculty influences or flows into the imaginative faculty. Now, the imaginative faculty is also the part of our brain to which our senses are attached. So the things that we see, all of the input from the world around us comes into the imaginative faculty. That was the cognitive model of Maimonides, right? So the way that God influences, so the imaginative faculty where we see stuff, that's in our imaginative faculty, right? Our rational faculty thinks through the logic and produces images too, which go to, so there's basically two inputs into the imaginative faculty. There's the inputs from our senses, from the world around us, the things that we see. And then there's the inputs from the rational faculty, which is also influenced by the active intellect and somewhere from God himself, right? Through all of the angels, right, which are the spheres, in the overflows down, down, down until it gets into our own brains, right? So remember, every time Rambam is about to use the word angel, what he means is not somebody flying around with white wings and blonde hair. He's talking about the intellects that control the spheres that are above us, through which the emanations come from God through those spheres all the way down to this world. That's what he means when he says angel. You have to screw that into your mind, because we think an angel, we start thinking of some being fluttering around, but that's not what he's talking about, right? So in a state such as this, the senses too cease to function. So when he's struck with the vision of God, the senses which influence the imaginative faculty are gone. Now the imaginative faculty is only being influenced by what's coming from the active intellect through the angels to his rational faculty. The overflow comes to the rational faculty and overflows from it to the imaginative. So the latter becomes perfect and performs the function. So now the imaginative faculty isn't getting corrupted by all of the things that this worldly things. It's not corrupted by all the things we see that look nice that we want to go to, the smells that draw us in, the tastes and so on. But rather, it's it's imagining things in its perfect, pure form, right? So that the images that the prophet sees are exactly the images that are being beamed into his brain by God himself through the angels. So prophetic revelation begins sometimes with a vision of prophecy. So thereupon the terror and the strong affection consequent upon the perfection of the action of the imaginative faculty become intensified, and then prophetic revelation comes. So all of this flow comes into the imaginative faculty, and poof, in the imaginative faculty, then there is a vision. And then the prophet sees, ooh, wow, right? I see this vision, right? Whatever that vision is, depending on the situation. As it is recounted of Avram, for with regard to the beginning of that prophetic revelation, it is said, the word of God came to Avram in a vision, and in regard to its termination, it says a deep sleep fell upon Avram, right? Because once a deep sleep, because all of a sudden his senses and his reaction to the world around him is completely stopped, right? After that, he said unto Avram, and then he had the vision, which was God speaking to him and the message that God gave him. No, that remember, this is it sounds mystical, and there's certainly a mystical quality to it. But Rambam is explaining this based on what he's taught us until now of Aristotelian science, right? All of these things were actual things. Now, how you would translate this in modern terms, I'm not going to get into now. We'll touch upon it here and there, and I have a few times, but I don't really know. No one really knows what Rambam would say if he was here today. But we do know what he said based on his understanding of the world. So know with regard to all the prophets, concerning whom it is mentioned that prophetic revelation has come to them, that some ascribe it to an angel while others ascribe it to God, right? You might find them say, God spoke to me. You might find them say, an angel spoke to me, right? Though indubitably it was produced through the agency of an angel. But no matter what, regardless of what language they use to describe it, the fact is, the mechanics of it is that it came through an angel. The sages may their memory be blessed have expressed this, and the Lord said unto her through the agency of an angel. The Chazal say it in Medrash Rabbah that they emphasize that even when they say God spoke to me, they mean God spoke to me through an angel. No, again, that in the case of everyone about whom exists a scriptural text that an angel talked to him or that the speech came from God, this did not occur to him in any other way than in a dream or in a vision of prophecy. The way it came to him was in one of those manners, in the manner which we just described. This is how they all worked, regardless of the fact that you'll find different descriptions, but this is the bottom line. Information about the speech that comes to the prophets, according to the expression used in the prophetic books. And I'm on the second paragraph. I turned to page 386. I'm sorry, I forgot to say every time I turned a page, but that's where I am now. In the first form, the prophet explicitly states that, so there's four ways that prophets describe what they heard. The first one is he explicitly says that it came from an angel in a dream. The second way, he says it came from an angel, but he doesn't explicitly say that it was in a dream. And the reason why is because he relies on the fact that everybody knows, right, that's how the revelation comes, right? Because it says, I do make myself known unto him in a vision. I do speak with him in a dream. So everyone knows that. So the prophet doesn't have to tell you every time when he says an angel came that it was through a vision. In the third form, the prophet doesn't mention the angel, but he says that it's God speaking to him. But he still says that it was a dream, right? But remember, Rambam said that it's always through an angel, like Chazal said, through the agency of an angel. So he just didn't bother because you know that God isn't directly talking to him. It's through an angel. In the fourth form, the prophet just says, God told me, do this or act this or say this or whatever, without making an explicit statement about angels or dreams, right? And when he does that, he also relies on the fact that everybody knows that it's either or. So the Rambam just made it clear. The reason why he went through this is he's trying to tell you, I know you're going to go look through your Tanakh and you're going to find the pasuk that says, no, this one says it's not an angel. Oh, this one says it wasn't a dream. Forget it. I just took care of all those objections. This is how prophecy works. Done. All right. So according to the first form, I'm going to do the next paragraph, the one that starts 386 at the bottom, according to the first form, and ends 387 at the top. He just brings all kinds of verses to back up what he just said. You can read that on your own. I'm going to stop here for tonight's lecture, and we'll start from 387, all the dicta. And I'll just give you a little heads up for next week, or maybe not next week, the next time we learn together, that he's going to tell us what about those guys who had dreams and God spoke to them and they weren't good people, right? So we know that God appeared to Lavan in a dream. And like, what's up with that? We know that he was a no good guy, or Elimelech, so on. So the Rambam is going to deal with that and explain that that's not a real prophecy, and he'll explain the mechanics of it, and that'll be in 387. So I'm on page 387, starting from all the dicta. So that's where we're up to. I think this is a good place to stop, and Mirz Hashem, we will all have a beautiful Pesach, and I'll open the floor for questions or comments before we close up. No, anybody? All right. Anybody want? Hopefully, have good dreams tonight, and we'll all have a beautiful holiday, and I'll see you all 2 Wednesdays from now, maybe, and 3 Wednesdays from now, Mirz Hashem, more certainly. But I'll stay in touch with the WhatsApp group and the texting group and stuff.
Okay.
All right. Have a
Thank you,
wonderful.
Saul.
You're welcome.
Thank you.